Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to the Gold Coast Elite Sports Conference webinar series. My name is Lily Gray and it is my pleasure to introduce today's session with our very special guest, Dr. Glenn Fox. This is webinar 3 of our 4-part series where so far we have heard from Hannah Huseman, the Mental Performance Coordinator from the Philadelphia Phillies, and Kevin Eastman, former NBA assistant coach and best-selling author. Today, we are thrilled to have Dr. Glenn Fox join us from the University of Southern California, where we will be asking him questions on the topic of positive emotions in high-performance environments. Before I introduce Glenn, I would like to quickly thank our event partners. Firstly, a massive thank you to our major event partner, the City of Gold Coast. For those tuning in around the globe, we can't wait until you're able to join us here on the coast in the future. We would also like to thank the following event partners for their ongoing support of the Gold Coast Elite Sports Conference, including Gold Coast Super Clinic Physiotherapy, Coomera Anglican College, Oztech Connect, Player Path, Pain Pod, Lynn Hughes Property, Sparms, Pummel, and RDK Sports International. Before I hand it over to Peter Munt, who will be hosting the event with Glenn, I will try to give a brief overview into Dr. Glenn Fox's prosperous and successful background. So Dr. Glenn Fox is a lecturer at the University of Southern California's Lloyd Grafe Center for Entrepreneurial Studies in the Marshall School of Business. He is currently undertaking projects which focus on the fascinating topics of neural systems for emotional regulation, high-stakes training, and developing entrepreneurial mindset skills in founders, business leaders, and athletes. Dr. Fox is also the former head of design, strategy, and outreach at the USC Performance Science Institute, where he performed research focused on elite and high performance populations, behavior change, and emotional regulation, with emphasis on high performance mindset skills like gratitude, optimism, and habit building. Some of his research included conversations with NBA legend Kobe Bryant and head coach executive vice president of the Seattle Seahawks, Pete Carroll. Glenn received his PhD in neuroscience from USC, where he focused on the neural correlates of gratitude, empathy, and neuroplasticity. Currently, Glenn is the director and founder of the USC Found Well initiative, which aims to understand and promote entrepreneurial mindset in founders and business leaders. So it is safe to say we are in very good hands today, ladies and gentlemen. Before starting, I will just ask you to direct any questions to the Q&A function, and Peter will get to these throughout the session and aim to get all of them complete before the end. So without further ado, I will hand it over to RDK Sports International Partner, Peter Munt, who will be doing the Q&A with Dr. Glenn Fox for today's session.
Thank you, Lily. And Glenn, I was going to get you to tell us a little bit about yourself, but I feel like Lily nailed it on the head there and giving us a good introduction and a run through from there. Good morning to everybody on today and good afternoon, Glenn, and welcome to today and joining us at the Gold Coast Elite Sports Conference. Mate, as I said, I was going to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and give us a run through, but I suppose, look, I'd love to start us off today with some of your workings and I suppose the passion and how you drove yourself into working in the field you're working at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and it's a delight to be here, and I'm just so pleased to be a part of this wonderful conference. My background is very strange in that but it's united by one principle, which is I'm interested in how the mind works. Since I was, very young, my singular goal has been to understand how the mind and the brain work. And in particularly, how do we look at things in such a way that helps us function? How do we look at challenges? How do we frame issues related to behavior, to choice, to personal relationships? What do we do to make our mind work? And what does it look like when our mind is working at the best possible domain or function or wavelength, whatever you want to call it? So I've just been singularly focused on that since I was in college, and I've just been drilling deeper and deeper and deeper into it, and it's taken a lot of turns as I've worked with various populations and worked with different things. So one of the things that I've found early on when I was beginning my research and my studies was that there were certain emotions and there were certain mental practices that anybody could do that would help them do better, that would help them be happier, that would help them thrive and connect more to people. And at first, my approach was really to look at religion and philosophy and to see what of the world's greatest thinkers said about the good life. And nearly every theoretical, philosophical canon pointed me towards gratitude as a near universal trait of positive living. And that just lit me up. I would say, well, what's this gratitude thing about? And I dove in and I found that all the way from Cicero, a famous philosopher who said that gratitude is the mother of all virtues, to the Maori tribes people who said gratitude is the glue that binds souls together, all the way to Adam Smith, who insisted that he was an economist and he was no cupcake. He was a pretty hard-nosed person who insisted that gratitude was in fact crucial for the functioning of a healthy society. The the next step for me was to look at the research. What does the science say about gratitude? What does it look like when we practice it? And what I found was extremely persuasive that gratitude was a powerful motivator for good and ethical behavior, but also that it had profound benefits for our well-being, our relationships to others, and to our ability to be resilient and to thrive. And that was still not enough for me, and I said, well, okay, well, how does it work? How does it work? Okay, gratitude's great. So it sounded nice, but what does it do? How does it work? And that's why I decided to pursue a PhD where I could study gratitude in the brain and study what happens in our body, what happens in our brain when we experience and practice gratitude. And what I found at the end of many, many years of research was that in fact, gratitude is everything it's supposed to be. It's an emotion that provides a powerful sense of well-being, and it does so by triggering a lot of the brain's function for connecting with other people, for our intrinsic ability to regulate stress, and um, and interestingly is more than just getting something nice. So what we saw in the brain was that it wasn't just gratitude was not just the feeling of happiness. Gratitude and happiness are not the same thing. Um, and the brain bared this out that gratitude had a strong correlation with activity in parts of the brain that have to do with our social connections and stress relief. So it flipped in my mind. Okay, what does gratitude? That's kind of how it works. Okay, so it has to do with social bonding and interpersonal joy and stress relief. So my mission then was, how can I take this to the streets? I think in academia, a lot of what we do doesn't have the impact that we think it does. People don't read scientific journal articles, and they shouldn't have to. And it turns out that a lot of great science is just sitting there waiting for people to take advantage of. And so I started looking for ways to expand my knowledge of gratitude and the good life into helping anybody. And in particular, I was really curious about if gratitude has all these powerful benefits. I was really curious about, okay, well, how does it work at the limit? How does it work at the limit? We knew that gratitude and its cousin optimism. We'll talk about optimism, I hope, at length here today too. It's again not what people think it is in general, and so gratitude and optimism were these two things that were just so powerful that people who were grateful and optimistic were more resilient, get out of the hospital faster, they heal faster. I mean, like crazy stuff. Not like bananas. It turns out, I would just spoiler alert. It just happens that people who are grateful and optimistic pay better attention to their doctors. So they stick to the regime
I
better.
listen.
It's not magic. It's like they're like, I'm not saying it has. There are some really interesting things that the body does to heal a little faster, but I'm saying this very pragmatically. that people just tend to remember things better. So I thought, well, it's cool for everyday people. So I was really interested then. All right, well, what about people at the outer limits? What about, I'd grown up my whole life doing extreme sports, and I grew up in the mountains outside of Yosemite, which is a big, very famous place in America. There's big mountains and rock climbing. And so my friends and I would do rock climbing and snowboarding and kayaking all through growing up. And the way you regulate emotion when you're under that kind of stress was really interesting to me. And so I was trying to think, okay, I've got this background in the mind, I've got this personal history, I love sports and extreme adventure. What do I do to put them together? So I started really looking at what does positive emotion do to help us when we're at our absolute limit. And that's when I joined the Performance Science Institute and helped found and create a program for high performance mindset. And even then I started to see, okay, well, now I learned a little bit from the limit, and I will dive into this later, but I really started looking at entrepreneurship and the risks and the challenges that entrepreneurs take as being very similar to the risks that these high performance athletes take. And in fact, what I started to see was that the high performance athletes, the elite athletes, um, often could learn more from the entrepreneurs than the entrepreneurs could learn from the sports people. We love to take these analogies from sports and translate them into business. But in fact, there are so many amazing stories of entrepreneurs overcoming incredible odds, working hard, mastering a craft that I think can also relate very well to athletes. So I'm kind of flipping it a little bit. The other thing is that there are tons of entrepreneurs to work with and only a small number of elite athletes. And so I was fortunate to get to know a lot of elite athletes and performers and worked with some really elite military units. And just my bread and butter now is focusing on this aspect of entrepreneurial mindset. So I hope you can see the theme, even though I've had this kind of roundabout career, that the theme has really been what are the tenets of the good life? What does it mean to thrive? And then how do we deploy mental resources to rise to challenge? And that's still ongoing. So I'm learning about entrepreneurs and working with founders pretty much exclusively now to help them develop their own version of entrepreneurial mindset. And then I keep a toe. I work with the only kind of elite military thing I do isn't really research based. It's kind of driven out of my desire to give back. But I work with a charity called the C4 Foundation, which serves Navy SEAL families. For those of you who don't know what the Navy SEALs are, they're kind of like an Australian Special Forces. So a very, very elite, very rare group of military operators. And so I've kind of shifted, rather than helping them sharpen the edge, I'm helping them recover and connect. So it's been a wild ride. And I can keep talking about all these things, but I also think it'd be great to hear from the attendees, to hear from anybody, to hear from you, Peter, and just to dive in and hopefully tell some good stories and leave with some really good insight.
No, amazing. Well, I think, look, I'd love to dig in a little bit into being able to just deploy that mindset and those tools to be able to get, I suppose, the success that you want to achieve. With your research studies and working through in those aspects, do you feel, and we'll probably work through with training the mind and working with it, do we want to delve into that a little bit and explore how that essentially works and some of the findings you came from the studies as well?
Yeah, let's start by saying something very simple, that it is important. It is important. And the reason I will say this, the piece of evidence I will cite is research that we published a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago. We had been working with a group of Marines, and a really elite group of Marines. These are, again, military operators here in the United States military, and they were called Recon Marines, and these are the people who go in first to very dangerous areas. And they take about 1,000 people who want to become Recon Marines every year, and about 200 or so graduate. So they have a near 80% attrition rate for this training. And the Marines came to us to say, how can we fix this? We know that many good Marines could become recon Marines, but quit for various reasons. So can you help us figure out how to find the people who are slipping through the cracks? Because we don't want to waste our time. We want people who have the potential to become recon Marines, So what are we doing? What can we miss? What are we missing? And it's an ongoing project with the Center for Body Computing at USC. And what we found, we deployed an entire battery of psychological tests and questionnaires. We also tracked through Apple Watch and our own app. We designed our own app, and we tracked them for the entire duration of their training. So we had a few hundred of these people go through, and we strapped a watch on them. They had an app, they had to check in, they had to do all these psychological questionnaires. And we also connected everything they did to their basic physical makeup. So what we found was that the mental skills were much more important for who graduated. In fact, the number of pull-ups, the number of sit-ups, even the how fast they could run was less important for whether or not they quit the training than their positive mental attitude, than their disposition. So the people who had a more optimistic, more positive outlook on life, a greater ability to use a sense of humor under stress, those people were much more likely to not quit and to graduate from the program. So that, I hope, tells you that it's important. It's not an extra thing. It might be the thing. Now, in that sample, notice that everybody going through this training was already a very good athlete, that to get in and to get through, these are already very high level, but we're talking about, the very tip of the curve, so to speak, or the very tip of the tail. And if you want to move into that area, those mental games, the mental skills become extremely important. So it's not an extra thing. It should be a central thing and a central part of anybody's training regimen, particularly if you want to go to those very high levels. You have to have a mental approach. The cool thing is, so now that was the first thing to justify that it's important. What the heck do we do? There are a lot of there's a lot of good things to do. Actually, there's a lot of good things, and this is what's so great, and that it doesn't have to be crazy. It really is just about taking time, and it's as simple as saying, this is part of my routine, this is part of my regimen, this is part of what I do every day, is find things that help my mind relax and focus and sharpen. And a lot of the issue that people have with that very simple axiom is that we expect our mind to work so much differently than our body. And it doesn't. Our mind and our body are, go figure, the same thing. The mind is something the brain does. Your mind is not software to your brain's hardware. That's not a thing. We never talk about that in neuroscience school. We never say the mind is a software, because it's not. Unless your computer creates its own hard drives while you sleep and your computer creates additional memory or additional connections, which it does not. Computers are great at being computers, and brains are great at being brains. Brains invented computers to do things brains can't do. So great. So the thing is that the brain and the body are the same thing, and the mind is something the brain does. And it's really freeing when you put it in these terms, because it means, okay, I know how to train my body. And I think a lot of elite athletes, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they kind of understand that they know how to train the things that the skills that they need. And it's simple because that's an analogy that can actually carry very well into how we train the mind. So the first thing is that if you want to commit to the sort of mental performance training, is that it takes time. We like to think, because we don't have a very good conception of what the mind is, we like to think that, okay, if I do it once, good, I'm good, right? Like if I teach you, Peter, if I teach you how to do math, to do 2 + 2 = 4, and you really get it, or teach you an idea and you get it, your brain kind of sticks with it. That's not how this sort of thing works. That is a different part of the brain doing a different thing that is different. And the brain does all the different things that you experience. That's your brain working. And the mindset, the mental performance training is not like that, in that it requires ongoing, steady work. But the work itself does not have to be particularly hard or grueling or gruesome or painful. It just has to be done every single day if you want to do it. If you don't want to do it, that's also fine too. It's completely fine. I'm not kidding. Like, it's fine, but it really helps. It's really important to do, right? So it's very similar to what I would recommend, or what probably the attendees would recommend for any of the athletes to work with. It's just taking 10 to 15 minutes, or ideally even a half an hour, um, and doing it maybe 3 to 5 times a week, which is focusing on, you can do meditation, you can do gratitude journaling, which is really my big thing. You can focus on optimism, you can do goals, but really, or creativity, activities that involve creativity and fun. The key is to have a little bit of fun, and to do that inner work where you just feel like we are right where we should be. And the more we learn to feel like, okay, we're right where I should be, is where we build our capacity to then handle these big stressors. But if we don't do that work every single day, to like just sit on your butt in your living room and and write down things you're grateful for, and really breathe and focus on things, or focus on things you're looking forward to, or focus on things that are making you stronger, like things that are stressors, reframing those as things that can make us stronger really helps. Or doing meditation. I'm pretty agnostic as to like what people do, and there's a lot of good research. There's a lot of bad research too. We'll leave that aside, but there's a lot of good research on how these things can be very good. And there's a lot of people out there who are going to say, oh, it's this, that, you have to meditate, you've got to do that. There, you can build your own recipe. There's no science, there's not a lot of great science that doing one thing is better than another. But the main thing is that it should complement the rest of your life. It should bring you into your connections and build your enjoyment and fun for challenge. And it should not disconnect us from other people, or the things that we need to do to function, and to like just kind of be able to enjoy life. The hallmark for me for what makes an effective mental performance strategy is how it will help us handle transitions in life. And that's where a lot of mental performance coaches really, really, I think, do their clients a disservice by focusing too much on, you win that race, you get that gold medal, you blah, 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 and I can help you get there. The thing is that somebody with enough talent and drive can go extremely far. But the fact is, and this is partly why I've kind of left a lot of the elite performance stuff behind, is because they accomplish that stuff, and then so what? There's the rates of depression and mental illness can be extremely high, if this mental performance aspect of things, or the mental context taking or perspective taking for why we should pursue these things, if it's not done in a way that's built on a deep well of self-love and self-compassion. I know how corny that sounds, but if it's not built on that, you can really lead people astray very, very quickly. We had I have some stories of this from USC athletes that I've worked with, or we worked on too much on like, oh, you're over indexing. They get so fired up about any one performance aspect that they can be burned out very quickly. So I apologize. I'm saying some stuff with a lot of nuance here. But I want to say that the moral of the story, you can drop all the nuance, don't worry about it, is take some time, do that inner work if you want to. And you can do gratitude, meditation, optimism, goal setting, or go, for me, it's working in my workshop and doing deep breath and just knowing that I'm right in the right place at the right time. Does that help, Peter? Does that make sense? So we kind of went from why
Oh,
it's important
absolutely.
to what we can do. And then I leave it to people to do it in a way, but it has to come back to self-compassion, has to come back to a way that charge your battery, and that would help you in the event of a transition. What are the mental
Yep.
skills that would do if you blow your knee out? and you're like, well, I've only built to be an athlete. Now I don't have a knee, right? Or I have to have an ACL, or I have to have a this.
So what now?
What are the mental skills that get you back when the chips are really down? Gratitude, optimism, things that work on a healthy pursuit. Those will help you in the field, in the arena, and in those difficult transitions.
No, I like it. And we've got a question that's come through here, which I think has some relevance to kind of what we're working through at the moment. The question basically states, when working in high performance teams, are there things that can be implemented to continuously support ongoing mental skill development to boost performance? And is it better to work on this collaboratively, encourage staff or players to work on it individually, or a collaboration of both?
It's a very good question. I would say that it has to really be baked into the culture of the place. It has to be very consistent. It has to be top to bottom. So we've worked with, and I don't want to overstate how much time I spent working with the Seattle Seahawks. I worked with Pete for quite a few years, and I did not go in there and tinker with their mental performance game. I worked with their guy, Michael Gervais, worked with him pretty closely, but I was in no way in charge of helping them with it. So I'm just going to speak from my observation of that and not from experience of turning dials and such. So what I see is that consistency is extremely important, and that authenticity is very important as well. And it has to be baked into every single exchange that you have with people. Elite performers also happen to, typically I find this to be extremely smart people too, and actually tend to be very good at perspective taking. So it's a conversation that I think the leadership all needs to have, is to say, how do we elevate the mental performance of our people? And then you can do, and then everybody's got to commit to being really consistent with that. And it can also be genuine. So I tend to be a very extroverted person. Not everyone is. So some leaders, some coaches can be very taciturn and a little bit more of a taskmaster person, but you can tell that underneath they really do care about their player. If you don't care about your players, please stop. If you don't care about the people, please don't hurt them. You can do damage, so don't. But if you really, assuming everybody cares about their athletes, assuming they care, okay, what do we do to line up to say, all right, look, I want these people to know that I might be tough, but I really care. And then just brainstorm with your team. What do we do? What do we do to really show how much we care? There's a very famous saying, it's a little corny of a saying of, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so I would say collaboratively is absolutely the way to do it, to encourage, really have a core leadership philosophy. This we see in entrepreneurs all the time, is when you hire somebody, do they know what the philosophy of this company is? Do they know what the mission statement is? Do they know why the owner is getting out of bed and working so hard every single day? And then sharing that with people, celebrating people, and just saying thank you, noticing effort, saying thank you. Everybody, we don't need to get, people really respond well to gratitude and to saying thank you for things. And there's tons of research showing that you'll get much better performance. I would say this, my last closing point is on this, is that it is the leader's responsibility, and it's that person's responsibility to make sure that everybody is in sync with the culture, and just brainstorming. It's not magic. Hey folks, what do we do to build a good culture? What do we put in the beginning of every meeting? I tell this to like company leaders all the time. Do something at the beginning of every meeting. You don't have to check in with everybody if you've got a big group, but like at the beginning of every meeting, say, hey, Peter, how'd your trip go? What are you looking forward to? That's one thing that always works with people. Hey, what are you looking forward to? What are you grateful for? Give me something. And I do weekly wins all the time, just as a warm up. And remember, your mind is something your body does. So when you do your meetings, have a warm up. Have a quick warm up. Hey, let's warm up. Give me a win. What's something that went well? What's something really minor that went well? People like, I didn't hit my snooze alarm. And you're like, yes, great, or whatever it is. Doing that, and then just think, what are the practices? And then you got to stick to it.
That's really good. No, I really like that. And I suppose as we roll through, and I got another question come in, and which is interesting in addressing, it's, I suppose, addressing the concept of athlete well-being and performance. I think the belief around high performance is only around their performance on field. Do we want to touch on, obviously, the mental skill? I wouldn't say mental skills, but some of that help with the brain and working with it to help them flourish, to enable them to perform better as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is something where I might differ from a lot of people in that I would say that um, you know, every one of the athletes you work with is going to have a transition from being elite to not being elite. And I think that if you're helping nurture that person through their career, I actually think there is a business proposition here as well. But to nurture that person's, ability to handle that transition well, I think is an important aspect. And I think performance, I really would encourage people to shift their definition of performance to focus more on broader pursuit. And that performance, by definition, requires us to give some control of how we feel about ourselves to the outside world. And that's not always, it's not inherently bad. But if you're like, I must perform, it's very hard to really focus on that in such a way that's not giving control to the external world to tell us how we should feel internally. Now, this must be done very skillfully, because if you give too much power to the outer world to tell you how you should feel internally, that's a recipe for sadness and anxiety and depression and all manner of mental malady. So when you're talking about performance and well-being, what I would encourage, and what we do with all of our students and with my founders, is we start by defining what is high performance, what is peak performance. And this is just something I think helps for everything. This isn't I can talk about some of the science of why this works in a second, but it's, to me, it's more just sort of a practical, pragmatic approach. Everybody talks about, "Oh, I want to be a high performer." Well, how do you define that? What does that mean? And you'll see, just by asking people, okay, how do you define high performance? How do you define peak performance? People start to have a much more honest conversation about, oh, what is this going to mean long term? And so working with people to say, all right, how do you develop and refine and think of that definition in a way to maintain the power of setting your own standards, is really important. One of the people I work with, who should be on your radar, she was a 6-time national champion beach volleyball player at USC. Her name's Sarah Hughes. Fantastic person. We just had a lot of great conversations. I'm not her coach or affiliated, but we've just had a lot of great interactions over the last few years, and I keep very close tabs on her. I asked her, what's her definition of peak performance? She says, I don't know, and I hope I never find it. I never want to feel like I've reached my plateau. I just want to keep striving and just do my best and live my best. And she kind of defines it, and then it can be a little circular, but she really focuses on, I don't know, it's always fluid, it's always changing. And it's just something I hope I never really find. Now, people can define it for themselves, but the act of defining it, I think, really makes a big difference. And people talk about this, they talk about the mind without defining the mind very well. You talk about performance without defining performance very well, even defining what well-being looks like, and to get people to see how they can go together. Because you don't win all the time. Um, and then some days your capacity to even be like what you remember yourself being is going to be diminished. So working on people to work with that whole thing to build the good stuff, I that's I'm a stronger advocate for that. It's kind of moving past sports psychology into sort of sports psychology 2.0. We're working on meaning and purpose, can help balance out some of that stuff. Because performance is fun. You want to win. Winning's great. Like, you want to go out there and like see what you're made of. But so much goes into it. Pete Carroll was like, last time I talked to him, he's like, we won the Super Bowl, but who knows? It's a fluke. He didn't say it like that, but he's like,
Yeah.
who knows? It could happen. I don't know. It just happened. It's just something that happened. We've had better teams that didn't win. We've had, all these things that can happen. And so for him, it was like, great, next day, cool, one, next day, let's do it. And so I think him and like Bill Belichick, another very famous NFL coach, you'll notice they're very focused just on like just kind of the mastery of a puzzle, of curiosity for mastering a system. And I really think they don't actually care that much about the accolades. I think Pete, if you just said, just keep playing football, nobody's going to come to your games, or, I mean, he would probably keep doing something like it.
That's amazing. And I suppose, do you feel that peak performance and success correlates? I'd love to get your definition and what your thoughts around someone feeling like they've succeeded or success, and what those studies have shown as well.
Yeah. Say, I think that my definition of success is really the ability to be grateful, no matter what, or actually really it's just to be grateful when things are very bad. That to me, if you can find a way to, I'm not saying deny that things are bad when they're bad, right? We've all been living through something really bad called COVID, and it's affected the whole globe, and it sucks. So the ways to be truly grateful, even when the chips are down, I think is really the definition of success that I work with. Now, what it comes down to is working with authenticity, and what it really amounts to is self-esteem, right? In a lot of ways, and that's a rather slippery term, but it's probably the closest thing you'll find in the research. And what we find is that self-esteem, when connected to that sort of deeper purpose, is very rugged. In that there's a study, a really funny study, that looked at people's kind of sense of purpose in life, and found that people who had a higher sense of purpose, that when they posted something on social media, that their self-esteem was completely unaffected by it if it didn't get a lot of likes. People who kind of focus on less, who tend to report less purpose in life, when they post something on social media, they actually did this as an experiment, that did not get many likes, their self-esteem dropped precipitously. What it shows is that we have the ability to sort of develop an emotional ballast for handling ups and downs. And I think tying in our definitions of success and peak performance and these things as much as we can to our inner goal of knowing what our sort of individual optimal function looks like for each of us, is really the way to hone that sort of mental performance craft. I know there's a kind of a controversy in the mental performance world about, well, will something like gratitude or optimism, will it sharpen someone's edge? Will they win fewer games if they don't have the chip on the shoulder, right? We all know the chip on the shoulder mentality as like when somebody's doubted you your whole life, when somebody's told you you're too small or too slow or too whatever, and that feeling of being doubted can be a really powerful motivator. But it tends to not do well in the transitions, again. So learning to use those things to motivate when it's built on an inner curiosity for how things work, tends to lead to the highest and most durable forms of human pursuit.
No, amazing. A couple of other questions that are kind of coming through as well. When you're in a high pressure environment like a sporting game or intense work situation, and all of the feedback around you is negative rather than empowering, how can you block out the negative energy to be optimistic around the process and outcome?
Oh, cool. And I'm happy Trojan fan, fight on. I'm glad there's some Trojan fans out there. By the way, any of y'all that's out there in the session, come to LA and come say hi. Shoot me an email when you're around. Just want to throw that out there. I'm always down for a cup of coffee or tea with anybody. So let me get to the question. Let me think for a second. There's different kinds of negative, right? There's different kinds of negative things. Let's talk about the ones that I think are the easiest to handle. So there's this theory, and I encourage people, there's not a lot of pop psychology on this, but I want everyone to find, I wish somebody would write a book. I wish one of the scientists would write a book on this, but there's this amazing theory called the challenge versus threat hypothesis. And it's done by a guy named Jim Blaskovich at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where we should all live because it's amazing up there. But if you haven't been there, it's amazing. But so this is this whole theory that when we faced with a stressor, our body will divide that stressor into feeling challenged by it or feeling threatened by it. And it makes sense. You've heard the terms before, but many people don't know that the physiology undergoing that transition from this is a stressor into a challenge or a threat state, the physiology is very well known. And it has to do not with how fast your heart beats, not with how much your palms sweat, because that happens no matter what. If you're faced with a real stressor, um, your arousal will go up. But what's amazing is that when we treat the stressor as a challenge, the heart will take bigger gulps of blood and push more oxygenated blood into your lungs and thus send more oxygenated blood to your brain where you're able to use it for things like thinking and emotion regulation. And when we go into a threat state, by contrast, the heart is still beating very quickly, but it's actually not moving as much blood around. And what is moved around is sent down into our major muscle groups to help us in the event that we need to run, or fight or freeze or whatever, fight, flight, freeze, submit, the standard fight or flight reaction. And it's important that the mental state of feeling like a challenge involves a few very consistent parameters. One, it has to do with feeling engaged in the problem. Our first reaction as humans is when something is bad, our first reaction is to push it away. When we feel pain, when we feel a threat to our ego, we want to push it away, right? But the challenge state, when you put this has been manipulated, but when you are able to help people move from a stressor into the challenge state, their mind stays engaged with the problem, right? They don't blink, eyes on the problem. Then they start going, okay, what are the available resources to handle this? What do I actually have? How do I engage with hard problems? How do I not look away? How do I lower my levels of denial? And how do I use whatever resources I have around me to make this situation better? This is one thing where athletes can learn a lot from entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs are by definition building something that does not exist anymore. Therefore, they have to take a bunch of parts of a web code or pieces of whatever they have, and they have to get something to function as something greater than the sum of its parts. So, by definition, in the act of entrepreneurship, you are creating value by combining things or breaking things that have not been broken or put together before. And that requires getting past this hurdle to say, I don't have enough to do what I need to do. And the flip of that challenge mindset is, oh no, maybe I do have enough to deal with what I need to deal with. So in the ordinary, challenge and threat literature, being engaged with the challenge, not looking away and focusing on it are the hallmarks of a challenge state, and staying engaged with it. So when we're faced with these kind of negative situations, I would take a page from the entrepreneurs who say, all right, what are the tools at my disposal to deal with this? And it's an accurate rendition of whatever the problem is in a way that can be broken down and manipulated to improve the outcome. I know how basic that sounds. It's hard to do. There's a lot of research that optimists, people who rank very high on their personality scale of their optimism, they have lower levels of denial. They actually did this where they sent them to a doctor's office and received some bad news. And the really optimistic people actually remembered what their doctor said better than the less optimistic people. They engaged more with what they had. They had lower levels of denial of what was happening, and they were more likely to stick with the treatment regimen. So the thing with this sort of mindset approach is that it should help us engage with negative emotions and not run with them. For some great reading on this, I have an author named Pema Chodron. You all may have heard of her. She's not a scientist, but she has some really great advice on dealing with negativity and with negative emotions in a way that forces us to say, well, maybe we need to look at this. Now, the different thing would be, feedback, receiving negative feedback. It's just like what I would encourage us to do is the same I would encourage any scientist when we get a result that's different than what we wanted or expected. A scientist, if you're setting your experiments up correctly, will learn from negative results as much as from positive results. And so when we're operating at a level where we're really, really running and gunning, we're trying our best, we're trying to make stuff happen, and we all have win streaks, we all have losing streaks, and when we feel like there's nothing else to do, it's really a matter of, okay, let's take stock. Let me look at the resources that I have and noticing, is this feedback telling me that I need to fundamentally change what I'm doing? Do I need to change the people from whom I'm getting feedback? That can be part of it. Or do I need to just plow on and keep working on it? But none of that process is very hard to do. I'm not a master of it myself, of course. But the awareness to start that process, to start to look at that stuff, is a really important part of our growth. And it goes back to what I said at the very beginning, that if we work day to day on building our ability to put some space between stimulus and reaction, that gives us the space to start to see negative feedback maybe as just feedback that tells us we need to do something differently, or keep doing things and just hope they get a little better, or we need to change our approach or change the people around us who are giving that feedback. This is the secret sauce of life. There's no recipe for it. I don't know. If I knew it, I would tell you how to cook it. But it does help to go, okay, this is part of it. Maybe I shouldn't run from negative things right away. I should look at them, I should evaluate them, and I should look at the tools at my disposal to change this. And then the thing I would say is that the factor about optimism is really just that exact process of, what do I do now to make the future better? Doesn't mean what do I do to make everything great so I never have pain again, because that's impossible. It's, what do I do to make the future a little bit more palatable, and just treating it like a experiment. But it takes that mental work, doing this every single day, doing a little bit of work every day is how we build that resilience muscle. And that goes back to what I said in the very beginning, that we all want this to be like learning math, but it's much more like learning how to run a fast mile time, in that you can get there, and then if you stop training, it's going to decline, but you get better and better and better and better. So it's just a matter of putting in the day-to-day work, give your mind a little exercise, and those negative situations, those negative emotions can melt away. And the last thing I will say about this is that social support is the #1 predictor of mental health. And when we're faced with those really negative feedback, finding a crew that can help with that, and making sure we're responding in a way that is healthy and connected to people can help too. But again, that goes back to sort of our daily practices of keeping connected with people. But it helps with training. The negative things become less negative and more just things.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
No,
And it's
awesome.
just part of the mastery. It's just part of it.
No, that's great. I've got a couple last questions, and we've got about 10 minutes to go as well. One of them is surrounding entrepreneurs and business owners. So when working with entrepreneurs, startups and business owners, what are some of the key discussion points or questions you would ask them? Is there advice you would provide to people who run their own business?
Yeah. Gosh, it's a big question. I would say, yeah, why do you want to start a business? I mean, I think for a lot of it, I'm speaking just from my own experience here, that a lot of the students that I work with, they want to be entrepreneurs, but they don't want to solve a problem. They just want to have a business. And so they'll spend all day, every day, just trying to come up with business ideas. And they're like, I've got an idea for a startup. And I'm like, cool, let's hear it. Like, I'm excited, but they want more to have the identity of an entrepreneur more than the identity of someone who solves a problem. So, so I think, the core element of every business is to create value. The core element of every business should be to solve a problem, or multiple problems. And so when I'm talking with these are college age students, I really say, well, why do you want to solve that problem? Is that a big enough problem to earn your attention? And that helps them kind of shift from saying, I want to be an entrepreneur to, oh, I want to solve this problem. And that tends to predict success. The two of the most universal traits of successful entrepreneurs, there's a lot of research into this, is the two most common traits are optimism. And that's not things are great when they're not. Optimism is, I believe I can make this thing work with some energy. So optimism. And then the second one is a really strong focus on goal-oriented behavior, meaning I want to wake up today and I want to chip away at a big goal. So those are the two universal traits of entrepreneurs. Those are more important in determining an entrepreneur's success than their startup capital, their wealth at the beginning of a venture. Those things are important too, by the way. It's not they're not important, but the optimism and goal-oriented show up more frequently. So to people who run their own businesses, I think it's extremely difficult. I think being part of it, entrepreneurs networks helps a lot to help people deal with the challenges. And then it's the same regimen, just the same as I would advise any athlete, is take some time for recovery every single day. Running a business is an extremely, extremely stressful, identity challenging experience. And the same rules apply, which is have a little fun every day and rest every single day. Your brain can't go all day, every day. It literally just runs out of energy, literally runs out of sugar. So you will get more brain power. We can work a lot of hours in the day, by the way. That's fine. I'm saying, don't work 20 hours in a day like a lot of our entrepreneurs want to do. 10 or 12 is probably about the most. And that, even that, I don't really believe it. You can waste 12 hours a day doing emails and frivolous baloney. But I would say for those entrepreneurs, take all that time and work on what matters, and recover every single day. That's reading a good book, reading some literature, taking a walk, going on a swim, and kind of doing the inverse of whatever it is that you need to do to recover. If you're doing the startup entrepreneur founder rep, because it's so brutal.
No, perfect. Well, we might finish on this one because I think you might delve a little bit into here, which is who are or what are some of the businesses that you've worked with that stand out for you on growth and outcomes based around some of the key points you've spoken about today. And I think probably a hard one to describe is what has made them successful that you've seen.
Yeah, so cool. Let me say, what companies have I worked with that I've worked with a few companies. I don't think you would know them in Australia. I've worked with this big real estate firm, and it's more that I'm learning from them than they're learning anything from me. But I would say that what they stand out is just how much their leaders really care about their people. It's a bias sample, right? Because it's kind of my whole jam. It's like trying to find people who care about people's potential. But I would say it's almost universal that the successful business leaders that I've seen, the billionaires and stuff that I've gotten to know, care about people, and they care about solving problems. And ideally, it's in that order. It's not always, but I do think that at some point they really care about that their people, they're getting the most out of their people. And I have kind of a rosy view of it. I know that there's not the case for a lot of people, but those are the people I want to hang out with, and I think those are the people that have maybe the most success both within and outside of their business. The one that I will highlight is, it's a nonprofit business, but it goes back to what I said, the C4 Foundation, which serves Navy SEAL families. It's a business. It's a nonprofit. It's a charity. It's not really a business. Our product really is developing programs for Navy SEAL families to connect and engage and stay healthy. And it has put everything into context. This was something we started with, an idea to do something to help. We had a SEAL that was killed in Iraq 5 years ago, named Charlie Keating. And Charlie was this amazing guy, and he left this legacy of really caring about his family and really being just this team-oriented, loving, happy-go-lucky guy. And he was like the ideal SEAL. And Charlie meant everything to this community. So when he was killed, the community really was heartbroken. And the response was an optimistic response, which is, this is terrible. What do we do to honor him? So the foundation was created to honor Charlie. And they brought me in because of my work on gratitude. And they said, hey, can you help us build a program to help families stay connected with optimism and gratitude? And I jumped at the chance. I thought this seems cool. But we started with like meeting with coffee at a little place along the coast. And now we have a 560-acre ranch. We've been raising a lot of money to help pay for the ranch and the operations. We've been building people. Just go check. These folks have like 100,000 followers on Instagram now. And it's this organization. It started with just us kind of saying, what can we do to help? What can we do to help? We were going to do like little programs at the Navy base, just have little chit chats. And then we were able to get a hold of this ranch and raise some money to buy it. And so that was probably the organization and business where I'm really seeing that they have the hard work. You don't get out of this in terms of what made them successful. You can't get out of this without putting in a lot of time. And it's time spent working on what matters. The other thing that tends to make these groups really successful is that they have a wide variety of experiences. There's some good research on that too, that they tend to be pretty diverse in terms of the things that they've done. And then it goes back to the optimism and gratitude that like, we're going to take what we have, we're going to make it work. And they tend to be very realistic about what that looks like. So in terms of what makes them successful, I really think it's just dedication to spending every waking hour working on a problem that matters to them.
No, that's amazing. Well, Glenn, I really appreciate taking the time today, and I think for me it was fantastic to hear, obviously, some of the insights and have a different voice, obviously, passing that through as well. So on behalf of everybody that's here and our partners as well, a massive thank you today for joining us. And this comes to the end of our webinar 3 of the Gold Coast Elite Sports Conference. Lead in before we kick off to the real thing. In the next couple of days, we will have an announcement that will announce our next speaker for our 4th webinar as well. But on behalf of all of our partners, a big thank you, and a thank you for our partners as well. And Glenn, we appreciate taking the time out of, I'm sure, your busy schedule this afternoon.
Absolutely. And just my pleasure. And please feel free to connect with me on Twitter, Glenn R. Fox, or on LinkedIn at Dr. Glenn Fox there. So anybody who's here, please feel free to connect, and just thank you so much for hosting. It was a real pleasure.
No, thank you. Have a wonderful day.